Well, hello, welcome. It's day 3 at the Delphi Forum, and I'm very happy to be joined by our panelists to have a conversation about growth. Joining me, very close to me, is Kyriakos Sabatakakis. He is country manager for Accenture. Mario Nava, he is director general DG Employment at the European Commission. I'm sure you had a very relaxing, quiet week this week. So it continues today. Christian Hillabrant, he is Chief Executive Officer at Vantage Towers, and Constantin Cotzias, he is Europe Director for Bloomberg. The title of the panel is Growth, Inclusive and Resilience. I think everyone agrees you want to see growth. Very few people would argue against growth, and you certainly wouldn't find them at this forum. But I wonder, in the parameters that we're seeing and the 3 days that we've just had lately, I think they really encapsulate a very difficult macro scenario to read. There's a lot of uncertainty and a lot of volatility. How do you pursue growth in this context? And Mario, perhaps we can start with you, because obviously you're doing this from the policy perspective, and safe to say it's very, very complicated to read, not just the quarter year, but the week.
Indeed. Kalimera, and good morning, everybody, and thank you very much for having me. Let's start with growth, because that's what you asked. But before I go to growth, let me make an aside remark. I mean, Europe may have not been the top place in the world to deliver growth in the last many years. And actually, you read documents from the Delors report of '92, the Sapir report of 2003, and then various single market reports, Monti, Draghi, Letta.
They're all Italians.
Italians are very good in producing former excellent prime ministers. So it's a skill. Every year we produce one, which is good. But apart from that, so we have been reading these, and there is one thing, however, that comes evident in these days, is that Europe is incredibly good in producing some sort of stability. We have become the risk-free asset of the world. I mean, look what is happening around. Look last year, elections. We have been basically the only place where we have had election. We have had some change, but we haven't brought any particular drama in the world, or we have not made any fundamental shift in change in politics. I think we kept lots of rationality. And that's exactly where I want to start, because what Europe offers, also because of our dynamics, which is arguably a long-term dynamic rather than a short-term dynamic, what we offer is really lots of predictability and stability. And that's why we could fundamentally change our approach to capital market in the last 5 years. I mean, we went on the capital markets extremely successfully, claiming that what we want to do is green and digital transition. And by doing that, I think we changed the nature of our relationship with capital market. Of course, the reasons why we went on the capital markets and the reason why we did the Next Generation EU, the post-COVID, the green and the digital transition, is because at the end of the day, what you want to do is to improve the well-being of our citizens, and the way to do that is through the productivity growth. There is no doubt. That is well identified, that we need to increase productivity growth. 5 years ago, von der Leyen won the guiding documents. You know, every 5 years there are the 100 days where we issue our guiding documents. So our guiding documents of 5 years ago was the Green Deal, to which I think we were faithful, in spite of the fact that 2 little episodes like COVID and war, which happens only once in 100 years, arrived while we were implementing the Green Deal, but we kept the Green Deal going. And now in the first 100 days, the guiding document is what you asked, the competitiveness compass. And the competitiveness compass as a guiding document essentially says 3 things, and I'll stop there. First, the innovation issue, closing the innovation gap. Europe has been good in some part of innovation, but not in scaling up innovation. So not in making innovation, entering and boosting the market. For that, we had always needed some help from other jurisdictions. Second is, of course, the decarbonization. Europe is leader in decarbonization in the world. Half of the green bonds of the world are issued in Europe. We produce 30% of the clean energy in the world, and we have been easily from Paris 2015, the COP, the famous COP of no more than 2 degrees. We have been leading of that. And third, in order to close the productivity gap, after many years of joint effort, I think people have understood that we need some strategic autonomy also in the area which are less funny, like defense. And that is probably the area where we are more backward, there's no doubt. We are nowhere leaders as we are in decarbonization, for example, in green or in other areas, but is an area where we put in effort. The three things together, with various initiatives, on which I'm sure we'll have time to go back, they constitute, if you want, our competitiveness compass.
And you said, just very briefly, you said we've become a form of pillar of stability. And if you go back to the start of the year, Davos was very, very negative Europe. But if you compare it, actually, Europe has outperformed the US. So there is something in markets that clicked in a different way to what was the narrative at the start of the year. It's not politics, it's real pricing. There
is no doubt. I'm on record June last year, before our election and before the American election, for having said I'm pretty convinced that Europe will show lots of stability. Let's see for the other jurisdiction. I didn't dare to make comments on the other jurisdiction. But I think the evidence today is that we are the risk-free asset of the world. And that's where people are going.
And Christian, from perhaps the other side, more the managerial, the idea of growth and how to foster a more resilience or more resilient growth, for you, what does that mean?
So maybe just starting out, Vantage Towers is a pan-European infrastructure company. We operate across 10 countries. We have 86,000 sites, which are a combination of telecommunication towers, rooftop installation, in-building systems, and small cells. And we really power the digital transformation of Europe, working with the mobile network operators. While these have been very volatile and uncertain times overall across many industries in Europe, we have been fortunate to actually enjoy a huge amount of success and very rapid growth in our business. But even we are not immune to the market forces. So for us, it's around the cost of energy, which is one of the key components that we supply for our customers, and finding ways to do so in greener ways that are cost effective. Secondly is the volatility around market pricing. We've seen a huge run-up post-COVID of the cost to actually build these facilities in time. We are a very capital-intensive business, and therefore we're very sensitive to interest rates, affecting our ability to build at scale and cost effectively. And then maybe the final piece is the real estate uncertainty. And what I mean by this is the ability to have access to public lands, maybe to cover underserved and remote areas that is critical for future telecommunication investments. So again, we're blessed by being able to, despite those things, have a very rapid and effective growth rate across Europe. And for us, we look to really start to work and partner with both the EU and local regulatory agencies in order to further accelerate our business.
Can I just ask you, and Kyriakos, you were nodding at some point, when you mentioned energy, this comes up repeatedly from European companies. Would you say at this point that's the weak point, actually, for Europe? It comes down to the cost of energy. Mario Draghi really underlines this in his report. Is that for you the biggest issue now?
I would say it's certainly one. In many ways, again, we're fortunate in that most of the contracts that we have, we're able to pass through a majority of that cost, but still we're very price sensitive to the cost of energy. And I think a secondary issue is we're seeing longer and longer lead times to connect to the grid. So this results in often having to come up with temporary solutions, things like generators, which obviously diesel generators aren't very eco-friendly as an ESG target where we're trying to decarbonize our business. And so in the end, having access to those grids on a timely basis, the predictability and the cost is a huge opportunity from our perspective.
And Kyriakos, if you want to follow up, just...
Yeah, sure. I mean, on the energy topic, definitely this is challenge number one, right? Because if you look at the statistics, ever since, the war broke out, Europe has been paying more than double, the rest of the world, especially the US. So how can you be competitive unless you address that issue head on. So something needs to be done there, and the projections for the future, or for the visible future, are not changing that part of the equation. So I think that's a major part. I mean, we can talk about other challenges as well, right? We talked about the innovation gap. There's still fragmentation in Europe where there shouldn't be. I like very much, I think it was in the Letta report, one example where they were saying, how is it possible in the US to have one telecommunications company with 100 million subscribers, and in Europe, the largest telco doesn't have more than 5 million subscribers. So how can you stimulate innovation if you have such a fragmentation in the telecom sector, in the energy sector, even in the financial services sector? And beyond that, I mean, there's longer-term, I think, issues in Europe. Primarily, I would say the demographic issue. And this is partly, if we're talking about the multiple crises that we're facing, I mean, this is something that is playing out over a long period of time. And the fact of the matter is that, in 50 years' time, Europe is going to have a smaller population. And obviously, you cannot have economic growth when your population is shrinking. And in countries like Italy and Greece, it's very, very serious as an issue, because the projections for both Italy and Greece are close to minus 40% of the population. So this is a ticking bomb.
And it brings up the question of migration, but as we know, this is a politically very sensitive topic, but it comes up in every economic discussion too. I mean, so something you'd argue would have to be done. Constantin, just perhaps to wrap this first round, when we talk about growth in Europe, what does that mean to you? But also, I think we've heard already the number of challenges that are sort of in the zeitgeist. For you, what's the temperature check for you?
So, well, thank you very much, Galimera, to everybody, and great to be back in Delphi. I'll pick up on a couple of points from previous panelists. Growth, obviously, is the right objective, and whether it was the Letta document or the Draghi report, it's good to see competitiveness part of that as a front and center of a strategic objective. Bloomberg does two things. I think most people in this room knows this. These are many of our clients who are represented on stage. We provide data to the market, and we provide news. So you can imagine what it's been like in the last few weeks, making sure that our clients, whether they're banks, whether they're financial institutions, are getting the data, the analysis, and the news that they need. I've got one interesting just data point just to give you a sense of that. It's not to say we've not done it in the past. I think, as Mario was saying, we've had COVID, we've had an invasion in the Ukraine, and we've been able to make sure that global capital markets get the information and the market data that they need to do their jobs. But this time last week, we processed, and it's only one data point because there's lots of others. This time last year, 2.6 trillion market data ticks. So that's bits of market data moving around the sort of plumbing of the global capital markets on the Bloomberg system. And this time last year, it was 1 trillion. So over 2.5, just because of the volatility and some of the sort of turbulence that we've talked about. So in terms of our operating business, it's just making sure we're delivering across what are, as we've talked about, pretty unique times. 100% agree on growth. We touched a little bit on telecoms, and we talked a little bit about energy, but I think Europe needs to get into execution mode now. I was just in Warsaw for a day. We come from the capital markets constituency. If we're honest, and the point I think that Mario made about startup and scale-ups, we're still not there yet. It's good to see political will around Capital Markets Union, or it's now rebranded as Savings Investment Union. But let's be honest, we've been talking about that for 10 years. So I think the roadmap looks good, the objectives look good, the strategy looks right, and I think now in some of these areas we need to start executing. Mm-hmm.
And Mario, perhaps just to follow up, the zeitgeist in Brussels before the Trump election was that it could, nobody would say it on the record, but that it could be a good thing because it was going to force Europe to accelerate a number of areas that had either become trapped by national political debates or that were simply just so complex that it's very difficult to get the file moving. I wonder, this year, the head of the commission started with competition and competitiveness, and that is a plan. Then it's now moving very fast now into defense. That's another big question. I think just from the execution side, what is the policy response going to look like from the European Union, and have we seen the end of it? Because I know you're pitching 150 billion euros. That's just for defense. As you know, a lot of people are wondering whether more money could be available, whether we've seen the end of this response, or just a start.
Yeah, as you say very rightly, I mean, it's not an issue here of leapfrogging on what happens in other jurisdictions. I mean, Europe is the largest single market of the world. We are 450 million people. We, of course, pay due respect and attention to what happens in other jurisdictions, but it's not the issue that we need an episode here or there in order to get better. We need to get better ourselves. And in order to get better ourselves, it's important to understand what is our strength. I mean, the strength of Europe is not oil or gas or natural resources. The strength of Europe are the people here, are people. That's the strength of Europe. The strength of Europe is our ability, is probably the best educated school cohort, probably, is the fact that we have a reasonably vast program of upskilling and reskilling. Is the fact that governments in the last 10, 15 years, if you think what is the single biggest success of the governments in the last 10, 15 years, is probably the employment market, the labor market. Labor market in Europe was in a very difficult situation 10, 15 years ago. You may remember Lisbon target, 70% employment rate. We are today at 75 with a target of 78. Unemployment is down to 6% and never has been so low. And I think this is what actually the strategy is based on. And not for nothing, when you look at I said what are the 3 objectives of the competitiveness compass, then there are 5 things which are called horizontal enablers. And essentially all the 5, if you have to summarize them up, you summarize them with single market of something. Single market of skills, single market of finance, exactly what Constantin was saying a minute ago. We were at the same place in Warsaw, at the same panel, at the same discussion. So putting together what we have. True that for some areas we have been talking about that for 10 years and not achieving as much as we would have liked. On the contrary, on other areas we have been talking less and achieving enough, right? On, for example, healthcare, it seemed impossible that we could do anything. At the end, we got out of the COVID with joint public procurement, essentially. Energy, we came out from the spike of the prices with a voluntary platform for acquiring energy altogether. So I think this is the strength in the single market. All studies show that basically the single market, take it or leave it, has contributed to more or less half of the European growth. And then if you push the argument further, it's important to bring the single market down to people. That's why union of skills. That's why making sure people come. And what is the union of skills? The union of skills is basic skills, keeping the school level very high. Notice that school level in Europe means immediately a diffuse school level. Most of the education in Europe is free. So by being free, school goes together with the social economy and so on and on. Then upskilling and reskilling, then circulation of these skills within Europe, and then attracting talents. And there you get on the M word, on the migration. My preferred sentence of when I was a young boy, I studied Latin and Ancient Greek. There is a very beautiful sentence of Seneca, and he says, it's not because things are difficult that you don't dare, but it's because you don't dare that they become difficult. And I think that on migration, we haven't been daring for a long while. And we have come to a point where now it's an urgency. You know, the largest cohort of the European population are the men on this table, 55 plus. We are the largest cohort. And that means what? That means that in 20 years, the largest cohort will be the 75 plus. There are not enough 25, 30 to make the 20 years old in 20 years. So that's the issue, okay? And, you know, demographic is mathematics. It's extremely simple. We have 25, 30 years old people, they are few, and they think of other things. That means in 20 years' time, we will not have 20 years old people. And there is a there is a solution that can be looked at.
And, you know, just to follow up, although it seems to me the political debate is moving in a very different direction and a much harder rules for migration, but not to get into the spiral. But I have just a quick follow-up. As it is a business summit, the question that you hear repeatedly from companies is whether this year you're going to see much more simplification, omnibus rules you've put out, so many already. Are we going to see more of this? And does it become a situation where you simplify, but also there's no more regulation? You're not going to be adding files.
I mean, simplification is one of the 5 horizontal enablers. And again, having been leader of the world, for example, in the green transformation, which is the area where we started from with simplification, I don't see anything wrong with the fact that at some point we simplify a bit. I mean, it's absolutely normal. You proceed, you do a tâtonnement, as Varras would say, and by doing a tâtonnement, at some point, you need to reorientate. So I don't make a big deal out of simplification. Actually, you know, one of the pillars of the European Union policy making is stakeholders consultation, and the other is impact assessment. So we have done a stakeholder consultation. Overwhelmingly was saying the direction is good, but the rules are too complicated. We have simplified the rules. That's it. I wouldn't make a drama out of it. Is more coming? If there are other sectors where this is evident, we will do it. Is there anything better that you can do than just that? Yes, for example, in the competitiveness compass, for several areas, we have proposed the idea of the 28 regime. So I think, honestly, we should move out of the idea that policy making is a perfect science and you get it right at the first thing. I mean, no. I mean, we are in politics. We do what we can. We do our best. We work 24/7, and sometimes we need to reorientate. That's it.
When Mario mentioned the 28th regime, you were nodding. Here's a question for you. What you've seen already from the policymakers, is that good? Because there's been a change in zeitgeist. He says it's not a drama, but you could tell something has changed from September until now. It's a new discussion.
No, listen, first of all, there's been great progress in Europe. First of all, that we're discussing the topics and that we have the reports to base ourselves on in our analysis, because we weren't even discussing the topics, right? I love the fact that Mario Draghi has quantified and says, listen, we need an additional 800 billion a year, otherwise we're not going to be competitive. So at least we have a North Star and we know what we're after. And I'll make a comment about that in a second. But first, I mean, on the point of the 28th member state, I think the Commission and Europe should have the courage to actually implement that. This would be a tremendous leapfrogging. I mean, for those who are not familiar, it's like creating a new state which has a certain set of regulations that once you comply with that set of regulations, automatically you're able to operate anywhere in Europe. That would be fantastic. This is how you create. It's like many times in consulting, we use that technique. We create something new, and slowly we migrate everything to the new, and the old just dies. We don't cancel the old, but, you know, by virtue of, you know, not being useful anymore, sort of dies. That would be a great thing to do in Europe. But going back a bit to the financing of, because, you know, at the end of the day, money needs to be put up for all these initiatives, be it in defense, be it in AI, be it in, you know, biotech or whatever we want to do. We definitely need to pool funds together. So, 2 comments from my side, and Mario Draghi put it in his report. And there's a French word that I like very much, mutualisation, which means mutual risk sharing, so mutually assuming risk and debt across the countries. If we don't do that, I don't think we're going to have the funds to compete against the rest of the world. So I think that's point number 1. Point number 2, one of the things, and you know, we keep hearing like Capital Markets Union and now it's called Savings and Investment Union or whatever we want to call it. I mean, you can put different names to it. But there's a fundamental thing that is missing from Europe that, for example, the US or China have, and it's a vibrant venture capital private equity ecosystem. Yeah. Unless we put our energy to creating such a vibrant ecosystem in Europe, and by the way, we have innovation in Europe, we just don't know how to scale it. We don't know how to... That's the point, because, you know, I was thinking back, and I see some colleagues here who are in mobile telephony. 30 years ago, I was working on the standardization of 3G. My colleagues here from the telco sector will understand. It was such a great thing coming out of Europe and such a great gift to the world. If it hadn't been for 3G, we wouldn't be able, from different countries, to speak to each other, including the US or Japan, right? So it's a great thing that Europe gave to the rest of the world. And there's so many examples that we can talk about innovation having started in Europe. So let's not get pessimistic about whether we have the innovation capability. We do. I think we just haven't gotten the funding right. And we need to sort that out.
It's so interesting you say, we shouldn't think we're not capable of doing things, because I think Europeans were so guilty of that at times. It's also a very negative discourse that becomes a sort of self-fulfilling prophecy at times.
No, absolutely. That's why, I'm proud of being a Greek in my country, but I'm proud of being a European about all of the great things that Europe has done. I mean, and I like very much what President von der Leyen said about, with AI, creating a new CERN type of entity. CERN was working on fundamental research, multiple European countries working together, doing something great. They discovered the Higgs boson. I mean, it's one of the most advanced things discovered in the world, right? So, and then all this engineering capability came out of CERN. So can we replicate that for AI? Can we replicate that for defense? And by the way, have dual usage of defense, because this is one thing where the US excels and we don't in Europe.
Well, thank you for that. And Christian, perhaps also a follow-up question pegged to this. Obviously, the zeitgeist, again, it has really changed from the policymaking in terms of we have to facilitate business, and we are listening to the business community. The head of the commission, she keeps repeating this, there will be dialogue and engagement with the different sectors. From your perspective, I'm not saying one thing can fix everything, but in terms of the regulation, what you hope could happen this year, what is your focus on? Or what's the one thing that you think is absolutely necessary?
In the telecommunications industry, one of the big challenges we have is fragmentation. Fragmentation in terms of mobile network operators, and while obviously it's important to preserve competition in markets, it also has the gravity of scale wins in this business, the ability to spread your fixed costs as much as possible over as large a possible industry segment. The same is true for us, and having healthy mobile network operators is critical. You start to see some actions across Europe of consolidation, not only of operators merging together, but also doing active sharing of networks to drive efficiency and scale in these businesses. This helps drive the investment that is necessary for us as an infrastructure provider to also build ahead with them. And so for us, I think there's this need to address that fragmentation. If historically Europe led the way in telecommunications and in wireless, and you talked about the 3GPP standards of GSM that ultimately took over, if I compare this to America that has 3 very strong national operators today, there's investment in public safety networks at scale, which allow all of the various blue light agencies to be able to communicate amongst each other. It's this continued investment in allowing the industry to mature that's maybe missing today and needs to accelerate. We see a vital role. We have investment and capital to be able to invest, but attacking underserved areas is critical for us. It may surprise you to know that today across Europe, we're somewhere sitting at 89% of all networks have 5G enabled rolled out to them. But if you look to those rural and underserved areas, that number drops down to 51%. And therefore, government support in infrastructure, perhaps subsidizing, this has happened in Spain, it's happening in Germany today, but it is not ubiquitous. And so for us, it's that willingness to drive innovation, to allow scale to occur in a light regulatory environment that ensures competition, but also provides incentives for the operators and companies like ours to continue to invest in scale.
And do you think consolidation across Europe will be needed? Ultimately, not just in your industry, but this is also a conversation in defense. You can make this leap forward, but it will have to come with smaller, bigger players.
Look, nobody likes higher prices, and the impacts of inflation have hurt consumers everywhere across Europe and worldwide. But the flip side of that is you need operators that are healthy and able to continue to invest, to bring innovation and technology change in the future. Today, the ARPUs, or the average revenue per user here in Europe, are dwarfed by those in the US. And what you see is a very different level of investment and innovation happening over there, because you have unified networks and you have an environment by which the companies are making enough money to reinvest. And so it has to come from one of two things. Either you make the industry healthier as a whole and you allow some of this consolidation to occur, or you continue to invest as a government in helping to subsidize building out into those underserved areas.
Just very briefly, which way do you think it's going to go?
Wow, that's a tough question. I would hope it's a combination of both, honestly.
Okay, and Constantin, you know, in Bloomberg, obviously, the great thing is that you have this global perspective, obviously very financial perspective too, but you have a lot of feedback with clients. In terms of the mood around Europe, what is it that you're hearing? Also knowing, just to caveat the situation, the narrative in Davos was proven wrong. I mean, this doom and gloom did not manifest 3 months later. So I wonder, what is the sort of feedback that you're hearing?
I would pick up on a couple of the points that we made. You're right. The sort of consensus in, you know, the elite salons of Davos was you've got to be all in America. Now that was before all of the current turbulence, right? You know, you've got all this AI, advantage. You've got the big tech companies that have scaled. You've got potential tax breaks on the horizon. You've got a strategy for reshoring. And so, but there were voices that said, well, what's the contrarian view? Where is their value? And to Mario's point, I think if you focus on the competitive advantages of Europe, right, and you stop this comparing and contrasting, because some of those comparisons and some of those contrasts don't really work. So the skill set absolutely is something that you hear from investors. The political stability, no question. You know, now that's a window. I mean, I agree. We've got political stability in a lot of the large member states, but you know, some of that was a close shave. And I think some of those jurisdictions need to start delivering on those promises. You know, it could be France, it could be Germany, it could be elsewhere. Absent that, I think in 3 to 4 years' time, that political stability again will be in question. But no question that when you speak to international investors, they see value, they see a plan. To my earlier point, can it be executed? In financial markets, let's continue down that road of completing the banking union, completing the capital markets union, to make sure those deep and liquid pools are available as the transition mechanism for a lot of the projects that we've just talked about. So you can be financed and it can be scaled, to Kyriakos' point, where often secondary and third rounds of large scaling goes abroad. I mean, again, just to close it out with a data point, DeepMind is always the example I use. You know, set up in the UK, 2 Brits long before actually we left the European Union. And yet when they really needed to scale, they found that they had to exit to Bloomberg, right? So that's the sort of thing that we should be retaining and we should be driving. But I think, to answer your original threshold question, I think there is real positive momentum and I think there is capital ready to be put to work, there's value, and people also understand there's fiscal headroom. You know, that's something we haven't talked about. America has really tapped out or increased its GDP to debt. Europe has a little bit of headroom, and we've seen that in some of the recent announcements. So you put that together with the policy direction we're seeing, I think there's real opportunity.
And just because I want to ask this question before we wrap, the title of the session was Inclusive Growth too. You know, I thought about the word inclusion. It's a fascinating word because on the surface, it has a positive connotation. However, it has become incredibly politically charged too. So I wonder, without getting into the specifics of policy, but is inclusive growth still something that people talk about, that we feel it's relevant? Because there's also this conversation that the vibes are shifting. This is not so much a talking point. Is it still relevant?
I think it's still super relevant. It's define inclusive. I mean, the one thing and I think the Prime Minister touched on it yesterday, and I thought he gave a really good analogy of when he graduated as a 21-year student in 1990 or 91. That's when I graduated. And now his son is graduating in 2025, which is when my son's graduating. And you compare and contrast that inclusivity and what you could do as a 21-year-old and what your kind of posture was and your mindset was about the opportunity. So I think inclusiveness, and it can mean lots of different things to different people, we have to make sure that we have the skills and the opportunity for the young generation, and this wealth gap and that inclusivity gap, let's call it, which have all sorts of political consequences if you don't get it right, is addressed. So I think it's still super relevant, and I think we need to think about our young generation. And
Mario, for you, it's still a relevant word. It's a different zeitgeist. Also, if you look at the 2019 election, you know, it was very young. It was a very different conversation. Now it feels in Europe, look, there's a lot of things that are going wrong. We have to focus on real things. You know, there's a war going on.
I think, I mean, in a way, inclusion has become even more central because we used to think of inclusion, we do inclusion because we are anime belle, as we say in Italian, no? We think well, we are beautiful people, and therefore we go for inclusion. The fact of the matter is completely different. Because of the demography I was saying, and because of how tight are our labor market, we cannot not afford to be inclusive.
Right.
If you look at the area, I mean, now, as I said, 78% the target of employment, 75% employment rate. Some countries are at 82, 83 employment rate. 82, 83 employment rate means what? Means that in the prime age male, everybody works. There's no progress can be done there. No progress, nothing. Everybody works. There's nothing else you can do. The only area where you can do progress are in those parts of the society where people are working less. Who are whom? Women, migrants, disabled people with disability. So in general, all areas where the inclusion policy can make wonders. You know, some time ago in my office came the president of the Roma in Europe. You know how many Roma we have in Europe? We have 12 million, okay, 12 million, larger than Belgium, 12 million Roma. They are extremely short, they have extremely short generations. I mean, at 31, you are grandfather or grandmother. So the generation is super short. And now they seem readier to get to the market. They need training, they need skilling and upskilling. This is the sort of inclusion we truly need if we want to have people who work. The truth of the matter is that we cannot afford any more people not working. We have few people. Let's realize it that. So when we talk about activation, it's first and foremost activation of those who are in Europe and for whatever reason they don't work. And also, of course, if we need to get people from abroad. Let me close with a very simple example. Again, a couple of months ago, in my office came a super famous multinational, and we were talking about digitalization, robotization, and so on and on. This is a multinational that basically distribute packages here and there. You have all understood which one it is. And they were telling me that since they digitalized and since they robotized their actions, actually they are able to employ much more people with disability. Because before they needed started boys to bring packages, and now even if you are in a wheelchair, you just need to push a button and the robot takes your pack. So that is exactly what we need. And that's why we need to keep the focus on inclusivity. And if we become the area of the world which is championing inclusivity, so be it. We are ready. We know what to do. We have the policy. We have been doing the policy for that. The oldest fund in Europe is the ESF. It's the first fund that was funded. ESF is the European Social Fund. We spend about 1/3 for the most vulnerable of Europe. So we know what to do.
Okay, so there's no quote-unquote vibe shift
No.
in Europe going on. Just as a final question, perhaps a final round, not to end on a negative note, but I do have to ask, however, in everything that we sort of debated now, there's always the idea of what could go wrong or what is the biggest impediment that perhaps could prevent not just the implementation, but to see material changes. Kyriakos, perhaps if we start with you, looking forward, what is perhaps the biggest risk and way to avoid it so that we don't end on gloom?
Well, you know, always when one thinks that he or she has hit bottom, they can always be worse, right? So I would say that we've hit bottom, so we can only go up from here. I mean, in general, globally, not just in Europe. We discussed about the risks and the possible impediments. I think maybe one thought from my side, because you know, the term perma-crisis was invented last year because we're in a continuous circle of crisis. So the point is, how do you deal with all the obstacles that are going to be throwing at you? And one concept that we've been using at Accenture with our clients, but also for ourselves, is the concept of compressed transformation. Basically, to get your organization up and running, to be able to respond very quickly to things. So which means that you cannot be running year-long programs. You should be able to react in months or weeks, right? Which means that you need to prepare for it. You need to be technologically savvy. You know, we keep talking about the digital core. If you don't have data, you're not going to be able to manage crisis. So you better be ready with data to be able to manage that. You better have upskilled your people so they're able to react quickly to the market and whatever the market throws at you. So it's basically a question of how you set yourself up to be dealing with all these things as opposed to singling out one thing.
Super flexible on data. Christian, same question to you. You obviously already presented things that you think can work, but what concerns you that may not make that possible?
I think for us, in the end, it's regulatory harmonization across the EU. Let's find ways to accelerate the pace of permitting, of spectrum coordination, and enabling companies like ours to go faster. The capital is there, the need is there, the digital divide must be bridged, and we're ready and able and willing to do that, but we need to look at the regulations across the EU and really put pressure to allow us to have access to those public lands and to build faster with the permits.
Thanks. Constantin, for you, sure, maybe Davos got it wrong, but still, this is not the end of the story. What sort of makes you think if this goes wrong, then we're going to have a problem? What concerns you the most?
I mean, I think we've touched on pretty much all of the scenarios, and I would say, well, let's focus on what we control. I'm obviously going to say, agree with what Kyriakos said about data and gaming out potential scenarios. I think for companies like us and others, it's making sure with all of the noise that's going on that you're staying absolutely as close to your clients as possible, because there's a lot of distractions out there, making sure you're solving for their actual problems and not what you think are apparently maybe interesting geopolitically or geoeconomically. There are still real-life commercial issues and problems that need to be solved. We've talked about some of those challenges. I'd obviously agree on the path that's been laid out on regulatory harmonization. And then I'd just close with the point that, that President van der Leyen also said, which was this closer and tighter dialogue, not on everything, but on some of these key issues between the private and the public sector, I think will be critical.
And Mario, final word for you. Obviously, it's hard for you to say, well, you could get wrong, but considering your side of the policy, but what concerns you the most? And maybe you're not able to deliver as fast as you want to, that you don't have the political consensus, as surely
Exactly.
There's something that concerns you.
Exactly. The biggest risk for Europe, I think, is disunity. When Europe is united, we have no fears. Yeah. I mean, COVID was evident. The war was evident. It was not easy to be united in the war, because the perception of Russia that, for example, we have in Spain and Italy is certainly not the one that you have in the Baltics or Poland, right? We have seen completely different things, so we have a completely different perception. Still, we were able to put together the interests. COVID was exactly the same thing. We were able to put together the things. And now we have in front of us, challenges which are equally big. The challenge of democracy, the challenge of skills, the challenge of innovation, productivity, they are equally big. I think if the member states stay united, then I think we will do it.
And just very briefly, because I have to rub, but how united are you? Because it seems to me there's always this idea of, the outliers. And Hungary, why not say it? Yes, it's Viktor Orban, but I think the 26, when they agree, actually there's much more unity now than there was a year ago. How united are you in real terms?
Well, in real terms, we have, and when the moment comes, I think Europe has shown a certain strength and a big display of unity. What we need to understand is that it does not come from the sky and alone. It needs to be built. That's the point.
Well, thank you so much to the four of you. Now we really wrap up. Thank you so much. Always a pleasure. And the forum continues. Thanks.